The cry in the dark. Nathan Daniels pulled his coat tighter against the crisp autumn air as he locked the front door of his small medical clinic in downtown Chicago. The amber glow of the streetlights cast long, flickering shadows on the deserted sidewalk. The day had been exhausting. Endless patient consultations, emergency cases, and a stack of paperwork still waiting for him at home. He fumbled with his car keys, his mind already drifting to the warm comfort of his apartment when a faint sound made him pause. A whimper. Soft, almost indistinguishable from the rustling of the autumn leaves that scattered the sidewalk. Nathan froze. Then he heard it again. A child crying. His medical instincts kicked in instantly, scanning the dark alleyway that ran alongside his clinic. His heart pounded as he hesitated for a brief moment before stepping forward. "Hello." His voice echoed against the cold brick walls. "Is someone there?" The crying grew louder. Nathan pulled out his phone, switching on the flashlight, its beam slicing through the darkness. He moved cautiously, stepping past discarded boxes and broken glass, his breath visible in the chilly night air. And then he saw it. A large metal dumpster, rusted and dented, pushed up against the alley wall. The sound was coming from inside. Nathan's pulse quickened as he stepped closer. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the lid, the metallic creak of the hinge cutting through the silence. Inside, nestled among filthy, discarded bags, was a tiny child. A boy, no older than 2. His dark brown eyes, wide with terror, were red-rimmed from crying. His small body shivered violently, wrapped in nothing but a thin, tattered blanket, stained with dirt. His tiny fingers clutched the fabric as if it were his last lifeline. Nathan's breath hitched in his throat. Hey, he whispered, carefully reaching in. "It's okay. You're safe now." The boy flinched at first, shrinking away. But then, as if sensing that Nathan meant no harm, he reached up, silent, desperate. Nathan scooped him up, cradling the fragile body against his chest. The child was freezing, his small frame trembling uncontrollably. Who could do this? Who would leave a child out here like garbage? Then something caught Nathan's eye. A small piece of paper was sewn into the corner of the blanket with meticulous stitches, hidden as if it were never meant to be found. Nathan carefully pulled it free, his breath catching as he unfolded it under the dim glow of his phone's light. "Protect him at all costs. They will come for him." A cold shiver ran down his spine. Nathan's eyes darted around the empty alley, suddenly feeling exposed. The distant hum of city life, cars, laughter, the faint melody of a street musician, felt strangely disconnected from the dark reality in front of him. Who was coming? And why did this child need protecting? The toddler whimpered again, burrowing his face into Nathan's coat. The innocence of that small gesture made something in Nathan's heart tighten. Whatever this was, whatever danger this child had been left to escape, it wasn't over. With a renewed sense of urgency, Nathan turned on his heel, hurrying back to his clinic. His mind raced with possibilities, but one thing was clear. He wasn't leaving this child alone tonight. Nathan reached his clinic doors in record time, fumbling with his keys as the child whimpered against his chest. His hands were shaking, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The note's words played over and over in his mind like a warning drum. Protect him at all costs. They will come for him. Who? And why? The moment the door unlocked, he stepped inside, flipping on the bright fluorescent lights. The clinic was empty now, reception chairs neatly arranged, the faint smell of antiseptic lingering in the air. The quiet hum of medical equipment was the only sound besides the toddler's uneven breathing. Nathan hurried to the nearest examination room, laying the child down gently on the padded table. The little boy clutched his coat, as if afraid Nathan would leave. "You're safe," Nathan murmured, rubbing warmth into the child's tiny hands. "I promise." His medical instincts took over. He grabbed a stethoscope, pressing it to the child's small chest. The heartbeat was strong, fast, but steady. His lungs were clear, though his skin was too cold. No bruises, no immediate injuries, just cold, scared, and alone. Nathan wrapped him in a fresh, soft blanket from the supply cabinet, tucking it securely around him. The toddler's dark eyes locked onto his, unblinking. "Are you hungry?" Nathan asked, voice soft. The boy didn't respond. He just stared. Nathan moved to the kitchenette in the back of the clinic, searching for something suitable. The best he could find was a bottle of pediatric electrolyte solution, something he kept on hand for dehydrated children. He warmed it slightly before returning to the examination table. He crouched down, holding out the bottle. "Here, it's okay." The toddler hesitated before reaching for it. His small fingers wrapped around the bottle as he took a tentative sip, then another. His hand still trembled, but he drank with slow, deliberate swallows. Nathan exhaled, a tightness in his chest loosening slightly. But that relief was short-lived. His eyes drifted back to the note. It hadn't been left on the child. It had been sewn into his blanket. That meant whoever wrote it hadn't wanted it to be easily found, and they hadn't called the police. Nathan chewed the inside of his cheek. The logical, responsible thing to do was to report this immediately. An abandoned child needed to be documented, put into the system. But something about this situation felt off. He had worked in medicine long enough to see the worst of humanity: parents who hurt their children, families who abandoned their loved ones. But this wasn't just neglect. Someone hadn't just left this child. They had hidden him. And they had left a warning. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, staring down at the toddler, who was still watching him with wide, curious eyes. The boy didn't speak, didn't cry anymore. As if he had already learned, in his tiny existence, that making noise wasn't safe. Nathan clenched his jaw. He wouldn't call anyone. Not yet. For tonight, he would keep the child safe. Tomorrow, he'd figure out what the hell was going on. The next morning, Nathan woke with a start. For a moment, he forgot why his couch felt lumpy, why his neck was stiff, why there was a weight against his chest, until he looked down. The toddler had curled up on top of him, one small hand gripping the fabric of Nathan's t-shirt. His breathing was slow and even, his tiny body finally warm under the blanket Nathan had wrapped around him. Nathan stared at the ceiling. This was crazy. He had a life, a demanding job. He wasn't a parent. Yet as he looked down at the sleeping child, something deep in his chest told him that he couldn't just hand this boy over to the system. Not until he knew the truth. The child stirred, rubbing his eyes with chubby fists. He blinked up at Nathan sleepily, then a tiny smile. Nathan's throat tightened unexpectedly. "Good morning, little guy," he said hoarsely. The toddler didn't speak, but his fingers grasped Nathan's shirt again, as if grounding himself. Nathan exhaled. "Well, we need to call you something." He thought for a moment. "How about Jordan?" "That was my grandfather's name." The boy didn't respond, but he didn't protest either. "Jordan it is, then," Nathan murmured. But before he could settle into the morning, his phone rang. Loud, shrill, urgent. Nathan jolted upright, shifting Jordan to sit beside him. The toddler blinked up at him, still groggy. The number was blocked. His stomach tightened. He hesitated before answering. "Hello." Silence. Then a distorted voice, low, mechanical. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into, Dr. Daniels." Nathan's blood turned to ice. He gripped the phone tighter. "Who is this?" "You need to forget about the boy." Nathan's eyes darted to Jordan, his protective instincts roaring to life. "Not happening." A pause. Then the voice softened, almost regretful. "They know where you are, and they're coming." Click. The call ended. Nathan's heart pounded. He shot up from the couch, locking the doors, checking the windows. The morning sunlight suddenly felt too exposed, too open. Jordan watched him with quiet eyes, his small fingers twisting in the blanket. Nathan swallowed hard. He wasn't giving this child up. Not now. Not ever. But whoever they were already watching. The watchers in the shadows. The morning air was thick with unease. The muffled sounds of the city, honking cars, distant sirens, the rhythmic chatter of pedestrians, felt strangely disconnected from the storm brewing inside Nathan's chest. He had replayed the phone call in his head 100 times already. Forget about the boy. They know where you are. They're coming. Who were they? And how did they know about Jordan so fast? Nathan's hands were steady, but his pulse thundered beneath the surface. He glanced at Jordan, still bundled in the blanket, sitting on the couch. The toddler watched him with silent curiosity, his small fingers grasping at the frayed edges of the fabric. His heart clenched. Nathan had saved countless lives in his career. Patients with gunshot wounds, victims of abuse, addicts clinging to their last breaths. But never before had he felt this primal, almost irrational need to protect. This boy, his boy now, was in danger, and Nathan had no intention of letting anyone take him. A sudden visit, a sharp knock at the door made Nathan's breath hitch. Too fast. He grabbed Jordan instinctively, tucking him close before peering through the peephole. A woman, late 30s, sharp gray suit, hair pulled into a neat ponytail, professional but unassuming. She had the aura of someone who knew too much but revealed too little. Nathan hesitated before cracking the door open. "Dr. Daniels?" she asked, her voice clipped but not unkind. "Who's asking?" She pulled out an ID. Diane Lawson, Child Protective Services. Nathan stiffened. "CPS. Already?" He quickly glanced back at Jordan, who was now peeking at the stranger with sleepy curiosity. "It's a little early for home visits, isn't it?" Diane gave him a tight-lipped smile. "We received an anonymous tip about an abandoned child in your care." His stomach dropped. That was fast. Nathan masked his growing panic. He kept his face neutral as he stepped back, gesturing for her to enter. Jordan clung to his leg as the woman walked in, her eyes scanning the room with the trained efficiency of someone who had done this 100 times before. "That's a nice blanket," she said, her gaze landing on the tattered fabric wrapped around Jordan. Nathan's pulse quickened. It wasn't a random comment. She knew. "Can I hold him?" Diane asked, her voice softening as she crouched near Jordan. Jordan, for the first time since last night, whimpered and buried his face into Nathan's leg. Nathan's protective instincts flared. "He's not comfortable with strangers," he said, his tone edge. Diane straightened. "Dr. Daniels, I'm going to be very honest with you. CPS procedures dictate that when a child is found in these conditions, we remove them immediately and place them in foster care." Nathan's throat tightened. "But," she continued, folding her arms, "your record is spotless. No history of misconduct, no prior complaints. In fact, I did some digging before I came here. Your patients call you the man who never gives up." He swallowed hard. "That note you found with him." Diane's voice dropped, her gaze flickering to Jordan. "I need to see it." Nathan hesitated, but something in her expression, something tired, burdened, made him reach into his pocket. He handed her the crumpled paper. She scanned it quickly, her jaw tightening. "This is worse than I thought," she murmured. Nathan frowned. "You know something." Diane exhaled. "I have a contact in law enforcement who flagged something unusual. A report came in last night. An unidentified group asking questions about a child matching Jordan's description. No names, no official inquiries. Just quiet digging." Nathan's blood ran cold. So, whoever abandoned him, someone's looking for him now. Not someone, a group. Nathan's grip on Jordan tightened. What do they want with him? Diane's lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't know yet, but I know this: if they find out CPS has him, they'll track him faster than we can protect him." Nathan's stomach turned. He knew what she was implying. If Jordan went into the system, he'd be an easy target. He took a shaky breath. "Then help me keep him out of it." Diane studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. The first clue. Later that evening, after Diane left with a promise to stall the system, Nathan sat with Jordan on the floor of the living room. The little boy was stacking wooden blocks, his small face scrunched in concentration. Nathan watched him, a bittersweet warmth settling in his chest. He had no business keeping this child. He had no legal claim, no training. But he had something stronger. A promise, the unspoken kind. Nathan ran a hand down his face. "All right, little man," he muttered. "Time to figure out who you really are." He carefully spread out the blanket, running his fingers over the worn fabric. There had to be something, some clue hidden in the stitches. Then he felt it. A raised area near the corner. Subtle, almost imperceptible. Nathan grabbed a small pair of scissors, carefully slicing through the seam. His breath hitched as a small folded slip of paper tumbled onto the floor. Jordan reached for it, but Nathan gently intercepted, unfolding it. One word. Calderon. Nathan frowned. It wasn't a name. It was a place. He grabbed his phone, typing it into a search engine. Calderon wasn't a business. It wasn't a company. It was a private estate. A fortified private estate, owned by a family with deep pockets and deeper secrets. And Jordan had been hidden from them. Nathan's heart pounded. Why? Before he could process it, the doorbell rang. Nathan's breath caught. Too late. Jordan whimpered, scrambling into his arms. Nathan crept toward the peephole, his blood turning to ice. A black sit-in, and two men in suits standing at his doorstep. The escape plan. Nathan's breath hitched as he peeked through the peephole again. Two men stood at his front door, dressed in dark, tailored suits that screamed power rather than official authority. They weren't cops. They weren't from CPS. They were something else. The taller of the two, a sharp-jawed man with slicked back hair, lifted his fist and knocked again. This time, harder. Nathan instinctively tightened his hold around Jordan, whose tiny fingers clutched his shirt. The toddler's breath came in soft, uneven gasps against his chest. He could feel the child's unspoken fear, the way his small body tensed at the unfamiliar sounds. Nathan's heart pounded. Think, damn it. He couldn't just open the door. These men weren't here for friendly conversation. A voice, calm and controlled, rang out from the other side. "Dr. Daniels, we know you're in there." Nathan flinched. They knew his name. "We just want to talk." The voice was smooth, practiced, as if it had spent years persuading people to do things against their better judgment. Nathan clenched his jaw. "Yeah, right." A long silence stretched between them. Then, "We don't want to escalate this." Nathan's stomach twisted. That wasn't a request. It was a warning. He took slow, careful steps backward, his mind racing. Options. He needed options. The clinic was out, too exposed. The back door led to an alley, but if they had people watching, he'd be trapped. The fire escape. His apartment building had a narrow metal fire escape outside his bedroom window. If he could reach it, he could get down to the street undetected. But first, the distraction. Nathan shifted Jordan onto his hip, whispering against his tiny ear. "Hold tight, buddy." Jordan whimpered but obeyed, gripping Nathan's shirt with small, desperate hands. Nathan moved quickly, setting his phone on the kitchen counter. He activated the Bluetooth speaker, scrolling through his playlists. His finger hovered for half a second before tapping on a loud, upbeat rock song. Music blasted through the apartment. The pounding on the door stopped. Nathan didn't wait for them to react. He sprinted toward the bedroom, yanking open the window. The rusted metal fire escape groaned under his weight as he stepped out, the cold night air biting at his skin. Jordan whimpered against his chest. "I got you," Nathan whispered, adjusting his grip just a little longer. They started down the rickety steps, each one creaking under their weight. He moved fast but careful, knowing one misstep could send them both tumbling. Halfway down, the apartment door burst open with a crash. Nathan didn't look back. A voice cursed loudly. "Where is he?" Nathan's pulse roared in his ears as he reached the final landing. He leaped down, hitting the pavement with a jarring impact, but keeping his grip on Jordan secure. Then he ran. Nowhere is safe. Nathan's car was parked 2 blocks away. He hadn't wanted to park in front of his building that night. Thank God. His lungs burned as he sprinted through the quiet streets. Jordan clung to him, his tiny heart hammering against Nathan's chest. He could hear them behind him, shouting, scrambling. Nathan reached his car and yanked the door open. He shoved Jordan into the passenger seat, snapping the seatbelt across his small body. Then he dove behind the wheel. Engage. Reverse. Gas. The tires screeched as he sped out of the parking spot. In the rearview mirror, he saw the 2 men standing at the corner, watching him leave. One of them pulled out a phone. Nathan's stomach turned. This isn't over. A desperate call for help. Nathan didn't stop driving until he was on the outskirts of the city, where the neon lights gave way to empty highways and forgotten motels. He pulled into the parking lot of a cheap, run-down inn, his hands trembling on the wheel. Jordan had finally stopped crying. He just sat there, wide-eyed, his small fingers gripping the seatbelt strap. Nathan exhaled sharply. He needed help. He scrolled through his phone, hesitating for only a second before pressing Diane's number. She answered on the first ring. "Nathan." Her voice was groggy. "What's wrong?" "I need a safe place," he said, voice tight. "Now." Silence. Then, "Where are you?" He gave her the address. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Nathan leaned his head back against the seat, exhaustion washing over him. But relief. That still felt a long way away. The truth they didn't want him to know. Diane arrived exactly 20 minutes later, pulling up in a nondescript sedan. She got out, dressed in jeans and a hoodie, looking more like someone trying to avoid attention than a CPS agent. Nathan met her outside, Jordan still cradled in his arms. She took one look at them and cursed. "Damn it, Nathan. What the hell happened?" "They found us," he rasped. 2 men. They'd broke into my apartment. Diane's expression darkened. "You need to tell me everything." Inside the dimly lit motel room, Nathan recounted everything. The call, the note, the men at the door, the fire escape. Diane listened, her brows knitting together in concern. When he finished, she let out a slow breath. "Nathan, do you know who Calderon is?" Nathan shook his head. Diane pulled out her phone, typed something, and turned the screen toward him. A massive estate filled the screen, surrounded by acres of heavily guarded land. A private compound, owned by one of the most influential families in the country. The Caldwells. Nathan's heart stopped. Diane swiped to another image. Thomas Caldwell. The man in the photo was polished, handsome, and cold. He had the kind of presence that made people afraid without him having to say a word. And Jordan. Jordan had his eyes. Nathan's stomach churned. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. Diane rubbed her forehead. "Nathan, Jordan isn't just any abandoned child. He's a Caldwell." Nathan's blood turned to ice. "They'll never stop looking for him," Diane said, voice grim. "Not until they have him." Nathan tightened his grip on the toddler in his arms. "They're never getting him back," he said, voice low and deadly. Diane met his eyes. "Then you better be ready to fight." Blood ties and broken promises. The motel room was small and dimly lit, the peeling wallpaper curling at the edges like the worn-out secrets Nathan had just uncovered. The air was thick with tension, and the faint hum of the old ceiling fan did nothing to cool the storm brewing inside of him. Nathan sat on the edge of the bed, his hands clenched together so tightly his knuckles were white. Jordan was asleep on his lap, his tiny fingers still gripping Nathan's shirt, as if he knew that letting go wasn't safe. Across from him, Diane paced, her arms folded, her expression unreadable. "Nathan," she finally said, voice hushed but firm, "this is huge. Do you understand what we're up against?" Nathan exhaled through his nose, his jaw tightening. "I don't care how powerful they are." He ran a gentle hand through Jordan's soft curls. "They're not taking him." Diane sighed, rubbing her temples. "Nathan, this isn't just some custody battle. The Caldwells don't fight fair. They don't go through the courts. They don't do things the way normal people do." She looked up, her voice carrying a warning. "They erase problems. Make them disappear." Nathan swallowed hard. "What are you saying?" Diane stopped pacing and met his gaze. "I'm saying you need to be ready for anything." A long silence stretched between them, the weight of reality settling like a heavy blanket over the room. Nathan stared down at Jordan, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. This little boy, this innocent child, had been thrown away like trash, hidden from the people who should have protected him. And now, those same people wanted him back. No, Nathan wouldn't let it happen. Ever. The name that could get them killed. Diane sat down across from him, lowering her voice. "I've been digging since I left your apartment, trying to find anything on why the Caldwell family would want Jordan back after all this time." Nathan looked up, his heart pounding. "And?" She hesitated. Jordan's mother was Sarah Mitchell. Nathan's breath caught. Diane continued, carefully watching his reaction. She was a medical assistant, smart, kind, but terrified. She filed a restraining order against Thomas Caldwell a few years before she disappeared. Nathan's stomach churned. "Let me guess. He made sure that restraining order didn't stick." Diane nodded. The charges disappeared. Witnesses retracted statements. The judge mysteriously dropped the case. She leaned forward. "Sarah went into hiding, Nathan. She changed her name, severed all ties, and was living off the grid." Nathan's throat tightened as he pieced it together. "And then she had Jordan." Diane exhaled. She must have realized she couldn't run forever, so she did the only thing she could. She left her son somewhere safe. Nathan pressed a hand to his forehead, his mind spinning. "So Jordan's not just a Caldwell. He's the son of the one woman who tried to escape them, and they won't let that stand," Diane said grimly. A suffocating silence filled the room. Nathan finally spoke, his voice steady. "How do I beat them?" Diane hesitated. "Legally, you can't. They own judges, cops, politicians. You won't win that way." Nathan's chest tightened. "So what do we do?" She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "We disappear." The plan to vanish. Nathan held Jordan closer as Diane mapped out their next steps. "You can't use your credit cards, your ID, anything that links you to your life. If the Caldwells are already looking, they'll track financial records, phone pings, travel logs, everything." Nathan exhaled. "So we go dark." Diane nodded. "I have contacts. People who can get you IDs, documents, a new life." Nathan looked down at Jordan, his heart squeezing. Could he really do this? Leave behind his career, his home, his identity? Yes. Because none of it mattered if Jordan wasn't safe. "What's the first step?" he asked. Diane checked her phone. "There's someone who can help, but we need to go now." Nathan stood, adjusting Jordan in his arms. "Then let's go." The meeting that changed everything. They drove in silence, the city lights fading behind them as they headed into the rural outskirts. The roads were dark, winding, isolated. Nathan gripped the wheel tightly, every nerve in his body on high alert. Jordan was awake now, but silent, watching the headlights cut through the night. Finally, Diane spoke. "There's a man named Elias Carter. Ex-military, off the grid, specializes in making people disappear." Nathan glanced at her. "You trust him?" She hesitated. "I trust that he hates the Caldwells more than he likes money." That was enough for Nathan. They pulled into a secluded property hidden behind tall trees. A single house sat at the end of a dirt driveway, its windows dark, its presence almost ghost-like. Diane got out first, knocking on the heavy wooden door. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the door creaked open. A man stood in the doorway, tall, rugged, dangerous. His salt and pepper beard was unkempt, his piercing blue eyes scanning them with suspicion. "What the hell do you want?" Diane didn't flinch. "We need to disappear." Elias's gaze flickered to Nathan, then Jordan. His expression darkened. "You brought a kid into this." Nathan squared his shoulders. "This kid needs protection." Elias sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Damn it." He stepped back. "Get inside. Now." The cost of safety. The inside of Elias's cabin was cluttered but efficient. Maps, old radios, scattered files of people who no longer existed. He sat down, cracking his knuckles. "If you're running from the Caldwells, you're already screwed." Nathan swallowed. "We're hoping you can change that." Elias studied him. "You a cop?" "Doctor." Elias snorted. "Great. A doctor with a death wish." Diane leaned forward. "We need IDs, documents, everything to make Nathan and Jordan disappear." Elias was silent for a long time. Then, "Fine, but it won't be cheap." Nathan stiffened. "I don't care about money." Elias smirked. "Yeah, you do, because this costs more than cash." Nathan's stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" Elias's face darkened. "I mean, once you do this, you don't exist anymore. No job, no records, no past. You'll be ghosts." Nathan's breath slowed. Could he really do this? Walk away from his entire life? He looked at Jordan, his tiny, innocent face, his big, unknowing eyes. "Yes." Without hesitation, Nathan nodded. Elias exhaled. "Then let's get to work. Becoming ghosts." Nathan sat in Elias Carter's dimly lit cabin, the weight of everything pressing against his ribs like a vice. The wooden walls smelled of old whiskey and gunpowder, a silent testament to the kind of man Elias was, someone who had spent his life running from ghosts of his own. Jordan was asleep on the worn leather couch, his small frame barely moving except for the steady rise and fall of his chest. Diane sat at the table, arms crossed, watching as Elias pulled out a battered metal case and dropped it onto the table with a thud. The latch clicked open, revealing stacks of blank passports, forged birth certificates, unregistered social security numbers, an entire catalog of new lives waiting to be lived. Elias leaned back, exhaling. "You get one shot at this, Doc." Nathan swallowed hard. "Once we do this, you're not Nathan Daniels anymore. He's dead. Gone. Buried. That life." Elias gestured vaguely. "Doesn't exist. You don't call old friends. You don't slip up. And you sure as hell don't go back to places people know you." Nathan glanced at Jordan, sleeping soundly. His grip on the table tightened. "I don't care who I have to be," he said, voice steel. "I just want him safe." Elias studied him for a long moment. Then he pulled out a thick manila folder and dropped it in front of Nathan. "Welcome to your new life. New identities, new lies." Nathan flipped open the folder. Noah Carter. Born August 14, 1987. Profession: traveling medical consultant. Son: Isaac Carter. The name tasted foreign in his mouth. Noah Carter. He wasn't a doctor anymore, wasn't a respected member of the community. He was nobody. His stomach twisted, but he forced himself to accept it. He had to. New bank accounts, IDs, and a clean digital trail, Elias explained. "You'll take a road trip south, make it look like you're following a job lead, then drop off the grid." He tapped the map spread across the table. "This town here, Sagewood. Small, off the radar. Good people. Stay quiet, keep to yourself, and no one will ask questions." Diane frowned. You're sending them to some backwoods town. Elias shrugged. You think they'll be safer in a big city where the Caldwells have eyes on every street corner. He leaned in. This isn't about running. It's about vanishing. Nathan inhaled deeply, nodding. This was his life now. A ghost. Burning the bridges. The next day, they drove to a secluded spot by the lake. The water stretched endlessly, its surface a mirror of the gray sky. The wind was biting, carrying with it the sharp scent of pine and damp earth. Nathan stared at the fire pit Elias had set up. Inside was everything that tied him to his old life. His real birth certificate, his medical degrees, the last photo he had of his parents. It felt wrong, like cutting out pieces of himself with a dull blade. He clenched his jaw. Jordan, standing next to Diane, watched curiously as Nathan tossed the documents into the flames. His past curled at the edges, turning black before crumbling to ash. No more Nathan Daniels. No more safe, predictable life. He knelt down beside Jordan, smoothing the boy's dark curls. You ready, buddy? Nathan whispered. Jordan blinked up at him, wide-eyed. Where are we going? Nathan forced a smile. Somewhere safe. Jordan hesitated, then nodded. Okay, Daddy. Nathan's heart clenched. Daddy. The boy had said it before, but now it felt real. Because now, Nathan wasn't just protecting Jordan. He was raising him. The road to nowhere. They drove through the night, sticking to back roads and avoiding highways. Every passing town was a blur of neon signs, gas stations, and quiet neighborhoods where people didn't know them. Nathan followed the plan meticulously, making small purchases at random gas stations, swapping burner phones at truck stops, and avoiding ATMs. Elias had drilled it into his head. Leave no trace. Diane stayed with them for the first leg of the journey, acting as their guide, until it was time for her to separate. You sure about this? She asked, watching as Nathan strapped Jordan into his car seat. He nodded. This is the only way. She hesitated, then pulled him into a tight hug. Take care of him. I will. Diane turned to Jordan, crouching down to his level. You be good, okay? Jordan nodded. Will I see you again? Diane's smile was tight. Of course, kiddo. But the sadness in her eyes told another story. Nathan started the car, pulling onto the road that would lead them to their new lives. As the city lights faded in the rearview mirror, he whispered under his breath, Goodbye, Nathan Daniels. Welcome to Sagewood. Sagewood was exactly what Elias had described. A quiet, middle-of-nowhere town with a population barely pushing 5,000. A place where people didn't lock their doors, where neighbors waved at strangers, where gossip spread faster than wildfire. It was the kind of place where no one asked too many questions. Nathan, Noah, rented a small 2-bedroom house at the edge of town. The landlady, an elderly woman named Martha, didn't pry when he handed her cash. Single father? She asked, glancing at Jordan. Nathan forced a smile. Yeah, just trying to start fresh. Martha gave him a knowing look. You won't find trouble here, son. Nathan could only hope she was right. Building a new life. Days turned into weeks. Nathan kept his head down, took odd medical consulting jobs under the table, and focused on giving Jordan normalcy. He enrolled him in the local preschool, where Jordan quickly became a favorite among the teachers. They spent weekends exploring the nearby woods, fishing by the lake, and playing soccer in the backyard. For the first time in forever, things felt almost normal. Until the day the black car appeared. The shadows catch up. Nathan had just picked Jordan up from preschool when he spotted it, parked 2 blocks down, partially hidden behind a row of trees. A sleek, black sedan. His stomach dropped. It was too clean, too polished for a town like Sagewood. Someone was watching. Nathan forced himself to stay calm as he buckled Jordan into his seat. He drove the long way home, checking his mirrors, testing if the car followed. It didn't. But that didn't mean he was safe. That night, after putting Jordan to bed, Nathan locked every window, checked every door, and sat in the darkness with a gun in his lap. He had sacrificed everything for this life. But if the past had found him, he'd fight like hell to keep it. The reckoning. The stillness of the night did nothing to settle Nathan's nerves. He sat in the dimly lit living room, the weight of the gun in his lap both foreign and familiar. The soft glow of the streetlights seeped through the window blinds, casting long shadows against the walls. The black sit-in hadn't moved in hours. Whoever was inside wasn't just watching. They were waiting. Nathan's grip tightened around the gun's handle as he took a slow, steady breath. He had spent the last 3 months building a new life in Sagewood, a life that now felt like an illusion. Because no matter how much he tried to disappear, they had found him. Upstairs, Jordan was sound asleep, his soft breathing the only thing grounding Nathan in reality. The thought of his son, of the innocent little boy who had already lost too much, sent a cold determination through his veins. They weren't taking him. Not now. Not ever. Nathan stood, his muscles tense with anticipation. He moved silently through the house, his footsteps ghost-like against the hardwood floors. Then he made a decision. If they were waiting for him to make the first move, he'd give them one. A dangerous gamble. Nathan killed the lights and stepped out onto the porch, his body half concealed in the shadows. The crisp autumn air was thick with tension. Across the street, the black sedan remained parked, its tinted windows reflecting the dull glow of the street lamps. Nathan's pulse pounded against his skull. They know I see them. So why aren't they making a move? He exhaled through his nose, his mind already crafting a plan. Testing them. He walked deliberately, slowly, down the porch steps and toward the car. His gun was hidden at his side, but his grip was firm, ready. Still, no movement. Nathan's stomach twisted. Who the hell are they? When he was 10 feet from the car, the driver's side window finally rolled down, revealing a man in his mid-40s. Calm, collected, and entirely too sure of himself. The man tilted his head. Dr. Daniels. Nathan's blood ran cold. Not Noah Carter. Not an alias. They knew. His jaw clenched. You've got the wrong guy. The man's smirk was faint. No, I don't. Nathan's fingers twitched against the gun. What do you want? The man didn't move. He didn't reach for a weapon, didn't make any threatening gestures. That was the part that scared Nathan the most. I just came to talk. Nathan's heart thundered. Talk. You work for Caldwell, he said flatly. The man's smirk widened. Smart man. Nathan's stomach churned. He's not getting Jordan. The man sighed, almost bored. See, that's where you're mistaken. Nathan's body went rigid. The audacity. The certainty. The man leaned slightly forward, his voice dropping to a conversational tone. You've done well, Doc. I'll give you that. Changing your name. Running. Hiding. Not many people slipped through the cracks the way you did. Nathan said nothing, but his breathing sharpened. The man continued. But you don't get it, do you? He let the words settle. You think this is about custody, about some twisted family trying to reclaim what they lost. He chuckled under his breath. Nathan's skin crawled. It's bigger than that, the man murmured. Nathan's blood went ice cold. What does that mean? The man studied him, as if debating whether to tell them. Then he reached into his jacket. Nathan's muscles coiled, but the man didn't pull out a weapon. Instead, he held out a small photograph. Nathan hesitated, then took it. When he saw what was on it, his breath stopped. It was a grainy security image of Sarah Mitchell, Jordan's mother, taken 3 weeks ago. Nathan's hands shook. His mind refused to process the reality in front of him. Sarah Mitchell had been dead, hadn't she? He slowly lifted his eyes to the man, voice raw with disbelief. She's alive. The man's smile didn't fade. Now you're starting to understand. Nathan's stomach dropped. This was never about Jordan. It was about her. The truth Nathan never knew. Nathan locked the front door the second he stepped back inside. His hands were shaking, but he forced himself to focus. He stormed into the kitchen, grabbed Diane's number, and called. She answered immediately. Nathan. His voice was sharp. Sarah's alive. Silence. Then, Diane exhaled, her voice laced with something heavy. You need to tell me everything. Now. Nathan ran a hand down his face, his pulse hammering. They had a photo, taken weeks ago. This wasn't fake, Diane. She's alive. Diane was quiet for a long moment before she finally spoke. I think I know where to start looking. Nathan's stomach twisted. You already suspected. Diane hesitated. I didn't want to believe it. But the way she disappeared, the way every trace of her was wiped clean, it never felt right. Nathan gritted his teeth. And now the Caldwells want Jordan back because they think she'll come looking for him. Diane cursed under her breath. They're using him as bait. Nathan's vision blurred with rage. This wasn't about family. This wasn't about custody. This was a hunt. And Jordan was the lure. Nathan refused to let his son be used. Where do we find her? Diane hesitated. Then her voice was cold and sharp. There's someone who might know, but we'll need to move fast. Nathan's fists tightened. Send me the address. I'll handle the rest. A dangerous deal. Nathan left Jordan with Martha, the landlady who had taken a special liking to him. He kissed his son's forehead, whispered reassurances, and walked away with the knowledge that if things went south, this might be the last time he saw him. He met Diane outside a dingy bar on the outskirts of Sagewood. She was leaning against her car, her face unreadable. You sure about this? She asked. Nathan's voice was steel. Tell me who we're meeting. Diane's jaw tightened. His name is Marcus Finch, former private security for the Caldwells. He knows things. Nathan exhaled. And what does he want in return? Diane hesitated. A deal. Nathan's stomach turned. Of course he does. Diane met his eyes. Nathan, you need to be prepared for whatever he tells us. Nathan's hands curled into fists. If it gets me to Sarah, I don't care. Diane exhaled, then led the way inside. The bar was dimly lit, filled with the scent of old whiskey and cigarette smoke. A man sat in the back booth, his presence alone enough to command the room. Marcus Finch. Nathan didn't hesitate. He slid into the seat across from him. The man smirked. You've been looking for answers, haven't you? Nathan's jaw clenched. Tell me where Sarah Mitchell is. Finch chuckled under his breath. Slow down, Doc. Then his smirk faded. You want to find Sarah. He leaned in. Then you're going to have to make a trade. Nathan's blood ran cold. What do you want? Finch's smirk returned. Oh, it's simple. His next words sent a chill through Nathan's spine. I want the boy. The final stand. Nathan's grip tightened under the table. His breath was steady, but rage coiled in his chest like a storm ready to break. Across from him, Marcus Finch leaned back in his chair, completely at ease, as if he hadn't just said the most unforgivable thing in the world. I want the boy. Nathan's fingers twitched near his waistband, where his gun sat holstered under his jacket. Diane, sitting beside him, had gone utterly still, her expression a mask of forced neutrality. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Nathan's voice cut through the heavy silence. You're out of your damn mind. Finch smirked. Am I? He tilted his head, tapping his fingers against the scratched wooden table. Because from where I'm sitting, you've got no other options. Nathan's heart thundered. Finch was right about one thing. Nathan was out of options. The Caldwells had found them. The black sedan parked outside his house wasn't a warning. It was a countdown. And now, with Sarah Mitchell, Jordan's mother, confirmed alive, the game had changed. Jordan wasn't just a missing heir to a powerful family. He was a bargaining chip. Nathan forced himself to speak. "What does Caldwell want with Jordan?" Finch's smirk never wavered. "You're still asking the wrong questions, Doc." Nathan's jaw tightened. "Enlighten me." Finch leaned forward. "Caldwell doesn't just want the boy. He needs him." Diane's breath hitched. "Why?" Finch exhaled through his nose, rubbing his temples like he was dealing with amateurs. "Thomas Caldwell is dying." Nathan's pulse stopped. "What?" "You heard me." Finch took a sip of his whiskey. "Leukemia. Terminal. No donor match." His lips curled in amusement. "Except, of course, for one person." Nathan's stomach plummeted. Jordan. The realization hit like a freight train. They didn't want Jordan to reunite with the family. They'd wanted his blood, his marrow, his organs. Nathan's hand curled into a fist, the edges of his vision darkening. "You're telling me Caldwell wants to carve up my son like a goddamn spare parts factory?" Finch shrugged. "Pretty much." Nathan snapped. His chair scraped back violently as he lunged across the table. He grabbed Finch by the collar, yanking him close until their faces were inches apart. "If you think," Nathan snarled, voice deadly, "that I would ever let you or Caldwell lay a hand on my son, you're more delusional than I thought." Finch didn't even flinch. He just laughed. "Oh, Doc," he murmured. "You really don't get it, do you?" Nathan shoved him back. Finch straightened his jacket, still smirking. "You're not just dealing with some powerful family. You're dealing with people who have never heard the word no in their entire lives." He leaned forward again, voice dropping. "You can fight. You can run. But there's one thing you can't do." Nathan's breath slowed. "And what's that?" Finch's eyes glinted with cold certainty. "You can't win." Silence stretched between them. Nathan inhaled through his nose, forcing himself to think. He had to find Sarah. Sarah was the key to ending this. But if the Caldwells were using Jordan as bait, then that meant Sarah was already looking for her son. Nathan glanced at Diane. She gave a subtle nod, confirming what he was already thinking. They had one move left. It was risky, but it was the only way. The meeting that changed everything. They didn't go back to Satewood. They couldn't. Not with the Black Sit-in watching. Not with the Caldwells closing in. Instead, Diane made a call, one Nathan wasn't allowed to hear. Then she handed him a slip of paper with an address. "She'll be there," she said quietly. Nathan's throat was dry. "Sarah." Diane hesitated. "I don't know. But if anyone can get us to her, it's them." Nathan didn't press. He strapped Jordan into the car seat, his hands trembling slightly as he secured the buckle. Jordan blinked up at him sleepily. "Where are we going?" Nathan swallowed. "Somewhere safe, buddy." Jordan nodded, trusting him completely. Nathan's heart clenched. He wouldn't let him down. The abandoned church. The address led them to a crumbling, forgotten church on the outskirts of a city Nathan had never been to before. The stained glass windows were cracked, the once white paint peeling like dead skin. Nathan parked the car and got out cautiously. Diane followed. Jordan clung to her hand, his small fingers tightening as they approached the heavy wooden doors. Nathan knocked once. The door creaked open. A woman stood in the shadows. Her silhouette was slim, but strong, with sharp green eyes that flicked from Nathan to Diane. Her voice was quiet. "You're late." Diane's jaw tightened. "You got my message." The woman exhaled. "Come inside." Nathan stepped in, keeping Jordan close. The church smelled like old wood and dust. The pews were long abandoned, covered in sheets. A single flickering candle burned near the altar. Nathan turned back to the woman. "Who are you?" She studied him for a long time. Then she pulled out a photograph. It was the same one Finch had shown him. Sarah Mitchell. Alive. Nathan's breath caught. "Where is she?" he asked. The woman's lips thinned. "Safe. For now." Nathan's heart pounded. I need to see her. The woman exhaled. She's been waiting for you. Diane's fingers dug into her arms. Then let's go. The reunion. Sarah Mitchell was waiting in a dimly lit apartment 2 towns over. When Nathan stepped inside, his heart stopped. She was real. Her dark hair was streaked with exhaustion, her once bright eyes shadowed with years of running. But she was alive. And the second she saw Jordan, she broke. Tears spilled down her face as she dropped to her knees, arms open. Jordan hesitated. He looked up at Nathan. Nathan nodded. Go on, buddy. Jordan turned, then ran. Straight into his mother's embrace. Sarah sobbed, clutching him tightly, whispering his name over and over. Nathan looked away, his chest aching. Diane's voice was quiet. They're coming for her too, aren't they? Nathan exhaled. Yeah. Diane nodded. Then we finish this. The final stand. They didn't run. They didn't hide. They set a trap. Nathan called Finch. Tell Caldwell we have Sarah, he said coldly. The trap was set in the abandoned church. When Caldwell's men arrived, they weren't ready. Because Sarah wasn't alone anymore. Nathan, Diane, and an entire group of off-the-grid mercenaries met them head-on. They didn't fight with law. They fought with fire. By the time it was over, the Caldwell Empire fell. Epilogue. A new beginning. The sun rose over a small house in a quiet town. Nathan sat on the porch, watching as Jordan played in the yard. Sarah stepped outside, a cup of coffee in her hands. They shared a look that said, "We made it." And for the first time in forever, Nathan finally felt free.